Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead, and welcome to episode 114, Build in Scholarly Reading Time. In last week's episode, I talked a little bit about four things I do after I return from an academic conference to make sure that I capture all those great ideas and make those networking connections that I need to make. But this week, I want to focus on the other part of going to a scholarly conference in person, at least, is that I tend to visit the exhibit hall and buy some scholarly books. So I have talked in a previous episode about why I'm still buying University Press books and why I'm encouraging other scholars to do that now and then to help support our fellow authors. But one of the other parts of that cycle is what to do with those scholarly books when you bring them back. Because in my case, I actually bought three scholarly books. Two of them were colleagues' books that, I certainly want to support the work that they're doing. One of them is not in my research area. So honestly, I bought the book to support my colleague. Am I going to actually read this book? I don't know. So I'm putting that out there just that I know a lot of folks, when they go to a scholarly conference, they will buy a couple of books and then they feel like they have to read them all. And this is like a lot of extra homework on top of work we're already doing. There's a lot of reasons to buy a University Press book or a scholarly book. And so in this case, for this one particular topic, I think what I am going to do with this one is pass it on to someone that I know that probably can't afford to buy a University Press book. It's a graduate student that's working in that area. So in my case, I think what I'm going to do is I've supported my colleague, I've bought the book, I'm going to pass it on to a graduate student that I know could find this usable. So that's going to be where one of them goes. A second one is from a colleague that has a topic that's also not in my area at all, but I am interested in the way that he puts arguments together, and I'm kind of interested in the writing style of this book. So sometimes when we read academic books, at least for me, I'm not just always reading for content. A lot of times I'm looking at organization, how the book is built, what are some different ways to represent information. So for example, I think the way that this author happened to do figures in the book is very interesting. So I'm going to check that out a little bit more. So in that case, I am going to look at the book, but I'm just saying I probably won't read all of it. I know I'm going to definitely read some of it because I want to look at the structures of the arguments. But that leaves the third book that I bought. And the third one is also a book. It's not really in my research area. My research area is all in faculty and graduate student productivity, writing studies, academic project management, and all those sorts of things. But this particular book, I was very intrigued by the cover when I walked by it in the exhibit hall. And I'll have to put a link to it because I cannot remember the name of it off the top of my head right now. I should have brought it for a show and tell on this episode. But I will put a link to it in the show notes. And why I was interested in it is that it offered a different theoretical lens about thinking through rhetoric, which is one of the areas that I work in a way that I just haven't seen done before. So I will put the link to the book in the show notes. But in this case, for this scholarly book, I have to think about, when am I going to read this book? And I think this is a bigger issue, not just with scholarly books we might get at conferences or buy now and then, but just in general. When are we reading those 5 articles that are sitting on our desk, or those 22 articles that are sort of half read with notes all over the place? One of the things that I've talked about a little bit on this podcast is trying to manage how to work with writing and reading together. Because for me, many times when I'm doing some reading, I'm trying to automatically capture it in writing. So if I read for 30 minutes, I want to make sure that I'm doing something to capture those ideas that might translate or might trickle down into a project. So for example, if I read this new book, I read the first chapter, because I own it, and this is one of the reasons why I definitely like buying the books themselves, is I know I will be writing in the margins of this book. So I tend to take notes on scholarly work. If I have it printed, I tend to take notes right there in the margins, including things like connections to projects I have or scholarly articles I might produce that kind of build off of an argument that someone's making. So for physical books, that's one of the ways that I actually translate that content into writing. For digital things like scholarly articles, I do something a little bit similar where I usually have a writing project open that I'm working on first, and then I tend to read scholarly articles as I need them for that point in the project. So I think sometimes the way we think about academic reading, and this is really a larger conversation about how to build in scholarly reading time, But I think a lot of us tend to think of reading and writing as separate activities. Like I'm going to read first, then I'm going to do some writing. And a lot of times I do have reading practices that are completely separate from writing. So, for example, with this new scholarly book, I know one place where I have a regular time to read is in my half-hour wait at the end of the day to pick up my daughter from school, where I'm in a parked car just sitting in a line. I know for me, that's kind of an ideal time because there's nothing else really happening. I can't go anywhere, and a book is portable or relatively portable with a pen. So I know for me, I'll do some some reading that is completely separate from my writing. But when I'm using scholarly articles and other types of materials, a lot of times I start writing first. I think about what it is that I need as I'm writing. So, I need a source to support my argument that faculty in the tenure track years are not necessarily more productive than senior faculty or something like that. And then I will go and look at the research that I've already dug up, some of the articles. If I don't have it, that's when I will duck out and kind of get into a scholarly database, start looking at an article, and then I'll do some very targeted reading for the things that I need. So articles, I know I want to read the whole thing. So for example, I just read a really good article on how to develop writing project management systems. So that article, I know I'm going to read the whole thing. Something like that, a lot of times I will, if I can, print it out so it is portable and I'll take it with me. I'm not the best reader on screen. I do know that a lot of faculty that have e-readers and things like that are going to looking at work on screens and they're able to take notes and do all kinds of, kind of fun things like that. For me, though, if I'm going to look at a scholarly article that's, let's say, out of a database, so it's a PDF of an article or it's an electronic article in some way, a lot of times when I read it, I'll look at exactly what I need out of there and then start thinking about how to put those words or use those quotations or whatever it is I want from it in my own work right then and there. So I pretty much have a split screen situation where I have my document up and then I have the article up. But this really, I think a lot of these connections I'm describing with my reading process, one of the things that I find with a lot of our clients that come to Defend and Publish, they do need to spend some time reading. And a lot of times when they come to us, they're coming to us because they want to spend some time writing and they haven't done that and they don't really like to hear that they have to do some reading, but sometimes it is absolutely necessary. So here, this would be an argument for building in some scholarly reading time, either before writing, during writing, or after writing. So maybe extending your writing time if you know you're going to do some reading in there. But one of the things that we've recommended, for example, is we have clients sometimes that just honestly, they do not understand their methodology. They do not understand the general arguments that other people have made, and they really need to do some clarification. A second thing that happens, and this is something I've just done myself in a project, so it doesn't matter how long you've been in the scholarly publishing area, this is something that scholars need to do all the time. But I just finished a project where I need to redefine one of my terms. And the term, this is funny for this podcast, but the term was scholarly productivity. I realized in this project I had never defined it. So one of the things I needed to do then was go back and do some reading and look at other people's definitions and kind of figure out what kind of definition did I want to shape for my project. So in that case, that was another time where I needed to spend some scholarly reading time, and I did. So I ended up building in about an hour and a half to just read through some definitions. So one of the questions that comes up too with this is that, we never can read it all, and that is true. So this discussion about building in some scholarly reading time is sometimes laughable because you think about, well, all the reading material I have, could I even read it all in a year if I read every single day, 8 hours a day? Very unlikely. And so always we're making choices about, am I reading this scholarly reading piece cover to cover? Am I just reading for the bit that I need and then I'm moving on? Same thing with a scholarly book. Somebody had asked me, not this at this conference this year, but at another conference when I was buying a scholarly book, we happened to bump into each other and say, yeah, we usually buy a couple of books at a conference. And then we talked about how sometimes those books never get read. And then just in general, how many scholarly books do we read a year? And I know for me, I can read fast. I like to read. I'm not a big TV watcher. And even then, I would say I probably read maybe 4 scholarly books a year, mostly cover to cover, and they have to be ones that I'm extremely interested in. So I know I mentioned a couple of books that I've been looking at on the podcast about scholarly writing that I know The most recent one that I know I'm reading cover to cover because I'm going to do a podcast episode on it is that one by Beck Evans and Chris Smith. It's called Written because I'm really interested in the way that they've talked about completion for writing. So I know for me that will be a book I will read cover to cover. I know I'm going to read this one from the conference cover to cover. So hopefully this gives you some ideas about how to manage some scholarly reading time. Another thing that you might think about just as a closing idea, I have seen clients build in scholarly writing into or scholarly reading into their week where they just build in like 3 half-hour segments during a week. So that might be before they go to bed at night. It might be when they have some waiting time. But in general, they've set it up so it's a rhythmic activity that's happening. And so many times reading can help us think through ideas for writing. It can kind of trigger different ways to think about a topic and possibly stimulate some writing. So it's not a bad practice to build in. I also have another client right now that has basically put markers in their calendar. So, and it's just basically a marker. I think they do it on like the 3rd or the 4th of the month. It's not on the 1st where everything like bills and things like that are due. What they do is they basically have a little reminder in there about scholarly reading. And so that notation is just, have you done any scholarly reading in the last month? Doesn't matter like how long, they're not putting a time frame on it, but have you actually read something in addition to doing some writing or doing some research? So hopefully these ideas help for building in some scholarly reading time. I also want to share a tool from Textbook and Academic Authors Association, one of our podcast sponsor at this moment. So one of the tools that I recently discovered, and I don't know why I never knew this was in here before, but Textbook and Academic Authors Association, as you know, is one of our sponsors. And so joining the TAA gives you all these resources. So one of the resources I found it's underneath resources. It's under writer resources or resources for academic writers, but they have these little how-to videos in here. And this is the thing that I did not understand. I was thinking all the videos were more like webinars and they were really long. They're not. There are also these really great short videos. So if you look at this, I'm just scrolling down for those of you that are listening on audio. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see what I'm looking at. But there's a video in here called 8 Tips for a Productive Writing Sprint. And this video is less than 10 minutes. So you can check that one out. There's some other things in here, like I'm just kind of scrolling through. There's one about grant writing tips if you're doing a state grant, how to figure out a Creative Commons license. So this is something that a lot of us doing digital work are very interested in. What can we use? How can we use it? So just really, really short videos. There's a great one in there if you're somebody that wants to try some daily writing. Tara Gray has one in there on how to write daily if you want to get some work completed in that way. There's lots of people that do faculty productivity work in here, so this might be a really good resource. But I love these things because they're 10 minutes. And faculty developers, I know I have actually recommended some of these videos. So if you're somebody that's working with faculty and working on scholarly productivity, you might find that these are also useful for you. But I encourage you to check out those resources and happy writing.